Okay, so let's get into this, shall we? What we're going to look at in our first example is a mic pre emulation by Arturia, which emulates the magical V76 mic preamp. It's something that comes from the 50s. Can you believe it? We are using technology over 50 years old that is still considered to be so classic and such high quality that not only do we want to use plug-in emulations, but the hardware units are incredibly desirable and fetch ridiculous prices on the used markets. So what's so special about this plug-in? We're going to hopefully find out. As I said, it was made in Germany in the 1950s. You'll probably see the badge of Telefunken put on it. And what I'm going to do first of all is set up my usual comparison chain, which if you've seen my previous tutorials, you'll see I use Melder Productions mCompare plugin. And what you do on this is just a simple audio track that contains a very straightforward Oberheim pad that's had very little done to it. So it's just ripe for jazzing it up, shall we say. So we have one instance of mCompare, and we just close that for now, and then we go to the processing plugin that we want to use. So we go to Arturia here, and we drag in our V76 mic preamp. Okay, and before I explain about this, let's just finish off this comparison chain by getting another instance of mCompare. Okay, now what we do here, we simply press play. Okay, and we go to our first instance of mCompare, which is over here. And we want to generate this first instance. This is before the effect that we're going to use. We want to make that our source one. So we can just click on source one and then click off source one, and you'll hear the pre-plugin, post-plugin sound. Okay, so we do that by pressing generate source, and then we tell it to listen and then generate source one, and you'll get a confirmation this instance is generating a source one. We can close that and we can forget about it. And now we just turn on source one, which is before the mic preamp, by just clicking this. And if we want to hear the sound after the mic preamp, we just do this. There is, of course, one important little detail. This is this button here. It's automatic level control, and the ears can try and trick our brains sometimes. When we hear something louder, we automatically think, oh, that sounds better. Not necessarily so. It's just a psychoacoustic little trick that our ears play on our brains. So we can switch that on, and what that will do, that will level up both of these before the preamp and after, and we'll have the same volume so we don't get tricked. Okay, simple as that. Right, we'll leave that off for now, so we're going to hear what it sounds like, the pad sounds like after our preamp. Okay, I'm going to stop it there because I'm just going to give you a bit of history, and it is interesting history. So I hope it interests you too, because it really shows you just how revered the V76 mic preamp is and was. All those fantastic Beatles albums and Pink Floyd, etc., everything that was recorded at Abbey Road early on that is given the classic status, it was in fact recorded on consoles that were custom made at EMI to fit in with their kind of headroom and their impedance and all the other equipment. So they had to modify designs that they liked to fit in with their equipment. But yes, I wonder which mic preamp they chose to model their famous red consoles on. And yes, you've guessed it, the V76 is. This is Wave's emulation of the red. You can either have the 37 or the 51 console. But yes, you can read up further if that interests you. Lots of kind of details about just how much EMI customized and modified the V76 design. You can geek away to your heart's content. But suffice to say, you know, those albums are absolutely held up as the ultimate example of pop classics, and they used consoles based around these V76. Now, I've been privileged enough to work in various high-end studios, some of the best in the world, and I've always seen V76s in the rack, along with another design called the V72. And I do know that one of the practical uses, and I'm going to try and see if this works for a plugin as well, because it's more of a practical reason why engineers will pick out a couple of V76s to use, and that's because they have ridiculous amount of clean, warm tube headroom. The gain, you can whack it up. The gain is reportedly up to 76 dB of gain. So the practical use of that would be if you're using quiet microphones. And I think one of the most common applications when I've been producing, say, a project like the Beauty Room, the engineers have used, I really like the sound of ribbon mics on overheads for drum kits. And ribbon mics are notoriously quiet, so V76s are perfect for boosting the low signal of the, say, Coles mics, and you'll get a lovely, warm, valvey kind of sound as a bonus. So that's one of the most common things. I'm going to try and emulate that to see if it works on some overheads that I'm going to reproduce here. So, but for now, I'm going to use it for another one of its more modern tricks. I know one engineer in particular, this is his secret weapon. He is lucky enough to have a rack of original V76s, and even better, they are, the serial numbers are consecutive, which is quite important. With valve equipment, they can vary from unit to unit, and I do know that these original units can vary tremendously depending on, you know, how much abuse they've had and what kind of tubes, when they've been changed, etc. So he uses them to warm up synth sounds in the exact same way that I'm going to demonstrate right now. So enough of the history, enough of the kind of talk about what these are used for in hardware units. Let's see if we can apply some of this knowledge to our Overheim pad sound here, which incidentally is from Arturia's Matrix 12 emulation. So we're just going to play this. It's going through the mic preamp here. And while it plays, let me just go around the unit. You'll see here on the left-hand side, you have this equalizer. Now, this wasn't part of the original V76. This is an even rarer add-on module. I personally have never seen these as hardware, so I don't know exactly how rare they are, but I should imagine they are very, very rare. So not only have Arturia done a great job by bringing us the preamp, but they've also brought us this fantastic sort of shelving EQ as a bonus. And I've been messing around with this, and it's actually quite useful, especially with low-end pads like this. But I'm going to leave that for now and move over to the straight preamp side of things. You'll see here we have an input gain knob, and it's so basic, it's just done like a screwdriver type control. And then we have simply the on-off for this equalizer add-on here. We have a stereo switch which changes it from the usual traditional left and right processing, but mid-side is now more popular than ever, and this is where you would have this left-hand side would become the middle of your signal, and this right-hand side would then be the controls for the sides of your signal. And then the technology would then merge these together as a normal left and right. That's becoming more popular, so it's really nice that Arturia have kind of... I think that's a link button actually, but yes it is, that's a link button. So this is the control for the mid-side, and this is the stereo link, so that when you use the controls it does both of them, or you can split them into mono like this, and that's probably quite important for mid-side where you do more sort of separate processing on the middle and the side. Okay, so just to clarify, that is a, you know, to do stereo or dual mono, and that is to do separate mono, and this is the switch for the stereo mode, left and right, we're going to use here. Finally, the output trim. This ensures that when we start inputting more gain, the levels sound the same. It's a really nice feature because you can really hear what the hitting those input, the emulation of the input transformer and the pentode valve that is inside the V76. You really get to hear that. So time for me to shut up, and time for me, what I'm going to do here is get our M compare, and I'm going to start boosting this, and we're going to listen. I hope you're listening on good speakers or headphones, because this is going to be quite subtle to begin with. You can see here this kind of glowing VU meter type light is giving an indication of how we're driving the inside tube, and it actually gives you a good visual indication. Right, let's go back to our original source and see if you can hear any difference, or see if you think it's a bit too subtle. Right, with our input gain around 40 dB, I would say the effect it's definitely there, and it's quite subtle. And I would liken this, if you've seen my previous tutorial about how I use UAD Studer multitrack tape emulation to kind of use it on its most linear setting, so it's very, very clean, ultra linear setting, and so the effect on each individual sound is actually quite subtle, and it becomes a cumulative effect that builds up when you start adding 10, 12 tracks, and then the overall effect becomes apparent. So I would say at kind of moderate gain levels, input gain levels, that is exactly the same kind of approach that you're going to get with this plugin, because it's quite subtle, as you can hear. Now we can go through I want to try and find a real sweet spot, and what I will do to find that sweet spot is crank it right up, and you'll definitely, this won't be subtle. That is actually not an unpleasant kind of sound. You can imagine how good that would be for electric guitar. On a synth pad, I would thought when it starts to break up with it, I mean, you can see now how much gain these things have before they start breaking up. But even when it's breaking up, it's actually giving it a bit of a nice kind of raw saturation, rather than sort of nasty digital distortion. But I'm going to try and find a sweet spot here. Okay, that's right on the edge of breaking up. So you might get the odd, let's back it off a little bit, you might get the odd sort of peak that's going to break it up a little bit, but let's compare now. So what you can hear there is a definite warming up. I would describe that as adding complex harmonics. Yeah, it makes the sound more richer, it makes it more complex, it makes it a little, but at the same time it gives it like a kind of edgy rawness. So you can see the sweet spot there on a nice synth pad. It's, if you want it to sound a little bit less sterile and add a bit of movement in it, subtle movement as opposed to, you know, sort of adding some panning or modulation or flanging or filtering, reach for a mic preamp, because it will I like to use the word magic and expensive. That's what I think the great mic preamps, the classic ones, add. You can use all kinds of technical terms like you know, it's probably boosting certain odd or even harmonics, and it's doing non-linear things with the frequency responses, all that kind of technical stuff. From those who've seen my tutorials, I always try and approach it from a layman's term, and I would just add that it starts to sound a little bit magic. You know, that's the words I prefer to use with these things. And I definitely think we can start making it sound even better now, messing around with these kind of controls. So we reach for these filters first of all, and we're going to take the bottom end out, and that might enable us to push it even more because we're getting rid of the very low frequencies. There we go. Oh, that's really nice. That's almost like a perfect sound that we had there. I would maybe try and level control this before with a compressor, just to really control that going in. Compressor would all traditionally go after a mic preamp, of course, but this is using it as an effect, almost as a saturation effect. And I really wanted to show that aspect off, because one of the confusing things for a lot of producers is, why would a company emulate a mic preamp? Because most of the you know, the interfaces that we use these days, they've all got really good mic preamps on them. They're really clean. They don't sound dull like in the old days. You know, they're all of a sort of certain standard. Well, what you will get with a modern interface is a very clean, you know, totally usable sound. But these units sell for thousands of pounds and dollars for a reason, and that's because, I'm going to use that word again, they sprinkle like a kind of magic over stuff. It's not just about getting a clean signal into your DAW with these preamps. It's about the tube design, and it's about the input and output transformers. It's about letting, you know, pushing these to find their sweet spots, to let them do their magic, and then pretty much saving your favorite presets and leaving them. That's whenever I've had hardware units, I just basically find settings that I like, and I rarely deviate from those. We're going to just show how powerful this filter is, and it can get quite powerful. Listen to this. So I think these are really nice slopes. They sound really musical, actually. I can imagine them being really useful on, say, a vocal, and I'm going to try one of those actually on one of these. Let's quickly try the EQ, shall we? We'll put the filters flat again, and you can see here they're just basic shelving, high and low tones. So let's lower. Let's try and lose some of that bottom end again using the EQ. And let's try and shape it a bit more obviously. Let's really brighten this. So even with a mic preamp, with these extra set of features here, the filters and the EQ, we can get into some pretty good tonal shaping on top of getting the tube kind of sound of the preamp itself. So I think that's a really good example there of how it can add some subtle magic to a pretty straightforward pad sound. I'm pretty pleased with that. So I'm going to choose a different example now, different source material. So I'll load up a different session. I'll be back straight away.
Thanks everybody for watching, commenting and indeed liking. We really do appreciate all the support we get here on our Sonic Academy YouTube channel. So if you found this video super useful, please, we'd love you to hit the subscribe button. We update the YouTube channel every week with new content, and if you want to watch some more relevant content, just click on the videos beside me.